Let's speak now to Trevor Kavanagh. He's former political editor of The Sun and joins us. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. What do you make of the Prime Minister basically sort of pleading, begging with students and others not to take part in protests planned for today at various universities and elsewhere, which have been variously described as honouring our martyrs and celebrating 2 years of resistance, but come on the second anniversary of the brutal Hamas massacre on October the 7th. And the Prime Minister said these protests are un-British. What do you make of his plea?
Well, I think I make of it what I make of Keir Starmer generally over the last 18 months or so, which is that he's weak and pathetic, and that these mealy-mouthed words will be simply brushed aside by the people they're aimed at. I mean, the Americans have, of course, the First Amendment to the American Constitution, which enshrines free speech, but even there are provisos, and you cannot shout fire in a crowded cinema. Well, we're in a crowded cinema right now. And these are inflammatory protests, which are terrifying to a minority of the population, but nonetheless a significant minority, which is the Jewish population. And after the murder of worshippers at the synagogue in Manchester, the reality of that threat, the reality of crying fire in a crowded theatre, is manifestly clear to all of us. It's a potential running disaster.
It is quite sort of bewildering that people would think it was appropriate. And I was saying earlier, you know, the display of just ignorance and immorality and it's just quite shocking. A lot of people think, again, this is foreign. This is stuff that's happening in another country. It's not, but it actually tells us quite a lot about ourselves, doesn't it? It tells us about the people who we walk amongst and have to sit next to on the tube on the way home from work, you know, with their keffiyehs on and they think virtue signalling as they support a terrorist group. But also it tells us a lot about our own politics, because this is massively impacting decisions made on our foreign policy and indeed our home policy by this government.
And it is a commentary on the makeup of the fabric of our society in 21st century Britain, because Keir Starmer has called for and endorsed a free Palestine. Well, he has imported and presided over one being created here on our doorstep. And in London, it is so manifestly clear that we have a very strongly worded view about what's happening in Israel. And they have hijacked various words in the process with complete negligence of their actual meaning. The word genocide was defined in 1944 after enormously careful deliberation by the people who looked at the Holocaust afterwards and worked out what exactly had happened. And genocide means, very precisely, the systematic destruction of a people, a race, in this case, the Jews. It doesn't mean the dislocation of countries and civilians in the process of fighting a war.
Otherwise, every country, including Britain, that's ever fought a war, would be committing genocide.
That is true. And in fact, if they were prepared to look at the facts on the ground, these protesters would realize that, in fact, the Israeli army go to some considerable lengths to try not to kill civilians.
And this has been well verified by independent observers and senior military figures who've been on, watching the command and control going on. I mean, this thing, so much of this is based on absolute ignorance. Again, if you only watch the BBC, genuinely, you would have no idea what's really going on. You'd have not a single fact at your place. What do you make of another little conversation about facts, though, because Robert Jenrick is in the news today, but less as a Shadow Justice Secretary for accusing 35 judges of pro-migrant bias here and saying he wants to get rid of, the Sentencing Council and the like, but more for what the Guardian has obviously thought of as a gotcha, which is a recording of him speaking about walking around in Birmingham, particularly in the Handsworth ward, one of the most deprived wards in Birmingham, where there is a 90+% percentage of people who are non-white, a large number of people who don't speak English as a first language or at all, or are from overseas. And he said, basically, very, very simply, that he didn't see another white face and criticised the lack of integration. Is that a gotcha by The Guardian?
Well, The Guardian would count it as a gotcha, but it's looking for gotchas all the time. It's a grievance newspaper. And they completely ignore the facts on the ground, which are unignorable to the rest of the society. And we have become a migrant nation, and we are, as Trevor Phillips, the former head of Equal Opportunities Commission, has predicted, that we will become a majority black country in the course of this century. You cannot ignore these facts, but the left, particularly the wishy-washy hand-wringing Guardian, will ignore the actual facts on the ground and protest until it's out of breath on this.
But they've almost said it's in somehow just pointing this out is racist, just to notice the fact. But even when Robert Jennings was very, very clear, and he said that's not the kind of country I want to live in. I want to live in a country where people are properly integrated. It's not about the colour of your skin, he said, or your religion. Of course it isn't. I want people to be living alongside each other, not parallel lives.
Well, he's absolutely right. And I think that he speaks actually for a very large number of Conservative supporters. And I think that Kemi Badenoch wouldn't disagree with a word of it. The fact is that we need assimilation. The only successful form of immigration is via assimilation.
Yep.
And in certain cultures, we're like mixing oil and water. They are not going to assimilate. They have got sufficient numbers for them to live basically in isolated communities on their own, not really speaking much to the bulk of the rest of the society. And they are developing a way of life which is at least foreign to the bulk of this country. You can describe these things in various terms, but immediately you are smeared as fascist and racist.
Do you think
it's the language that counts?
Yes, and of course it is. It's so important. But do you think that actually this works anymore? I was just talking with Russell Quirk, my guest in the studio today, that actually this sort of claim that anyone who states a fact, a blatant fact, is somehow racist, that people talking about this and the lack of integration and the problems with particular communities, lack of integration and the sheer numbers, that actually, shouting racist at everybody who says this stuff doesn't really work anymore.
Well, I hope it doesn't, but it's a tried and tested and systematic process of the hard left. It literally is Orwellian. If you read 1984, this is exactly what happened in that book, which was extremely prophetic of where we are today. Whatever right or wrong argument you put forward, the left will smear it. They will take your words out of context. They will label it in a way which is offensive and wrong. And somehow or other that takes off. And they've managed to gag debate on this absolutely vital issue for the last 25 years. And it's working. Unfortunately, we are now discussing the reason why we cannot say what we mean is because we are treading on eggshells for fear of being labelled. Yeah,
I just don't think people are fearful anymore, and I think it did work for a lot of years. I was talking about this stuff in 2000. I was writing for the Sunday Express, but I know that the cat's out of the bag now. Let me ask you just finally: Tory Party conference is taking place, and obviously they're out of office, they're out in the rear, way behind in the polls. It's not looking great for Kemi Badenoch's future right now. And a new poll out yesterday has suggested that 2/3 of Tory Party members want a pact, an electoral pact with reform. Would you support that? Do you think that is something that would benefit either or both parties, or do you think that would be a big mistake?
It's very difficult to say now. It's still possibly 2 to 4 years from when we're going to have to put that to the test. If we are in the same position as we are now in that period, then yes, I think that some sort of coalition, if only to get rid of this horrific government. It would be, I think, a travesty if we had an election and we had two right-wing factions put to the margins because of a coalition of Labour and the Greens and the Liberal Democrats carrying on the wreckage that they're committing to this country. But I think that actually, I'm delighted to say that what Kemi is beginning to say is beginning to resonate. And you are seeing people with some brain cells actually saying that they're joining the Conservative Party. I mean, this is quite a triumph in the circumstance. I mean, looking at what's going on screen in Manchester, with all of those empty seats, and you and I remember vividly the times when those audiences, you couldn't find room to walk around the place all day and all night, and early in the morning, and the leftovers were lying on on the couches from the night before. It's dead up there, but there is a chord to be struck, and I think Kemi is beginning to strike.
Well, again, people thought that about Labour coming 2019, and they're in power right now with a massive majority. So we shall see. Trevor Kavanagh, he's counted them in, he's counted them out. Former political editor of The Sun, thank you for that.